Welcome into a brand new edition of the 06010 ESPN Communications Podcast. I'm your host, Alex Feuz, and we are joined by the one and only Kris Budden. Kris, ESPN Sideline reporter, and will be the sideline reporter for the Little League Softball World Series. Kris, walk us through. This has been a crazy few weeks for you. Just in Wimbledon. Now you're heading to Greenville, South Carolina. Walk us through what has the last few weeks been like for you?
It's been a little insane. Usually my summers after the Men's College World Series, I had about, 6 weeks worth of downtime, but then started adding on our major tennis coverage over the past year. So there's been little downtime this summer, but it's also a dream come true. I come from a tennis family, a tennis background. So the ability to go cover Wimbledon was once in a lifetime. It's everything you could have ever imagined. But it does put a kind of a dent in the summer plans. So I have been home now for 2 weeks, and then I'll go to Little League Softball World Series, come home for 4 days, and then go straight to US Open, where I will be for off and on for 3 weeks. And I say off and on because in between covering matches, I'll also go do some college football games as well.
So we'll get into your preparation for all these different events because I'm very curious on how you balance all of that. But let's touch on the Little League Softball World Series. You've done this event a few years now. How special is it in Greenville for this big event?
Yeah, it's so unique. It used to be in Portland in this dairy farm. And when they moved it, it's taken a while for the community to really build it up as to what it was in Portland. And over the last 3 years, you've started to see that town fall in love with the event and fall in love with the players there. There's a local team that makes the World Series every year. But on top of that, you have these international teams. And I remember 2 years ago, the team from the Philippines went really far. And the local Filipino community in Greenville, North Carolina, came out to cheer for them and packed the stands and fed them food that they couldn't get in America. And so there's these little stories that always developed. And one of the other things that I think is highly unique to that event is the way that those girls that play in that event admire our colleagues that cover it. From Michelle Smith, who played so many years in Japan. Like when we have a Japanese team in it, it is like she's Bono, like walking through the streets and these 12-year-old girls just obsessing over her. And the way that they do Amanda Scarborough, who's also on our call, or Jenny Dalton Hill, like the way that those girls just admire and seek the advice out of them. The parent, it's always a parent that coaches the teams, and watching how unique that is for, a father and a daughter or a mom and a daughter. There's so many unique stories that you don't know going in because it's not like there's press releases or there's newspaper articles. You have to really find them once you get there and they develop in front of your eyes.
When did you realize the Little League Softball World Series was a special event, almost like a purity to it?
Probably my first year when it was in Portland. And I remember, it's hard because these things last, they play the regionals and states, and it's hard for all the parents to be there all the time. And I remember my first year doing it, there was a dad that couldn't get there. The mom was there, and he came in, and somehow we got word about it. He was going to be there and surprise her. And so we had our cameras rolling the whole time that he walks up to her just before the game. And then, but it's also intense. These are 11 and 12-year-old girls and high pressure moments, and you see them in the circle and you watch them grow up, in hardship. And it's tough to watch a 12-year-old and a pitcher give up a couple runs and know, the pressure of what that feels like, and see them tearing up inside the circle. So all of that, like you understand not just what it means to the girls, but also what it means to the parents who, there's a lot of sacrifice in that kind of sport that it takes to get these girls to this level, and to watch the parents in the stands that, by the end of it, if you're in the finals, like I've interviewed you a handful of times and, I've kind of become besties, and it's hard to watch at the end, one team lose and one team win. But to watch the pride that those parents have for those little girls as a mom myself is very cool.
How different is it for you covering that event compared to all the other things you work on?
Yeah, I mean, it's different. It's super different from the prep. You can, you know, go over pronunciations and study these girls, but for my role, the stories you don't really get until you get there. There's a purity about it. College sports have obviously changed significantly over the last couple of years. Pros are what they are, and there is this, like they fill out these questionnaires of like your favorite joke of the day or what's your favorite app and your favorite athletes. And so it reminds you of why we all started getting into this. And it's part of the reason that I chose being a sports reporter when I was growing up was I wanted to tell people stories. And sometimes it's hard in the day in and day out of how many more stories can you tell on Carlos Alcaraz or, Quinn Ewart? I'm just trying to think of an athlete that's been around for a ton of time. There's not many more stories left out on those guys. And then you get these 12-year-olds and you find unique ways to tell their stories.
If a fan walked up to you that's never watched the Little League Softball World Series and you had to convince them why they should tune in, what would you say?
I would say just go as a fan, bring your kids, bring your dog, and just hang out at the ballpark and go to one of the international games or where one of the international teams is playing. Because for the first time, a lot of these kids are traveling away from home. They don't have the same fan support, but you fall in love with them and their culture and their silly traditions and superstitions that happen in softball and the chanting, and just go and find a random team and be a fan and cheer them on.
Kris, you mentioned a few weeks ago you were in London for your first Wimbledon. What was that experience like for you?
More beautiful than you even see on television. I mean, there's hydrangeas that are the size of your face. One thing that I didn't expect, there's bees everywhere because there's so many flowers. The ivy along center court, there's a prestige to it that you obviously see on TV, but until you're there, I grew up watching this sport. I grew up playing this sport. I was a huge fan of Roger Federer as my all-time favorite athlete. And the amount of times that he held that trophy, over the walkway to the crowd below. And it's like, I got to stand there in that moment where I've watched this so many times. I never in a million years thought that I would ever get to go there as a fan or B covering it. And it was beyond what I even imagined. There's bucket list items where like, that's cool. I've done that. Check that off, like Super Bowl or whatever. Experiencing Wimbledon for 2 weeks was unlike, you had to walk through the village just to get to our hotel, and the way that entire little Wimbledon village celebrates tennis over that 2 weeks you have to go to really understand what it is.
What surprised you most about your experience at Wimbledon?
Ooh, how much, like these players play so much tennis. And I think how much Wimbledon, even in their eyes, sets apart from the other majors. It's still prestigious to them. It's still, this is the one that I grew up watching. And I think for them, having also covered US Open in Australia, they're all different and they're all awesome in their own individual ways. But for players that have, you're interviewing Novak Djokovic, who's, won several of these things and been around the game, that it still means that much to them because of the prestige of what that event is. And then you're playing in front of Kate and William Middle, the Queen and the Prince, and everyone's there. And how that it's still like, for as many times as those players have done it, that it's pretty surreal.
You mentioned, so now you'll do Little League and then the US Open, and then also within the US Open, you'll do college football. How do you balance that?
Yeah, that's a good question, especially because our first weekend for college football, we will have 2 games. So I will go to the US Open for about a week and a half because we also cover qualifying week. And then I don't know quite how, we'll try and fit in meetings with the teams. Usually college football weeks are fairly easy in terms of the routine. And while there's a lot more prep that goes into each football game because there's more players having to watch film of the previous games, you talk to each of the teams either during the week or when you get there on a Friday. It's more time consuming, but there's more of a routine. And now we'll have to figure out how to fit all of that in while being in Flushing Meadows. But I'm super excited. I mean, for the role that I do as a sideline reporter, there isn't a sport that role is more important for in terms of being the eyes and the ears on the field. So my prep has also changed through the years. I used to come in with like 10,000 different stories on every player. And then the more you do this, the more you realize like your real value is being able to provide something that the booth can't provide.
Do you remember the moment that clicked for you?
Um, yeah, it was actually a conversation with Holly Rowe. I remember I used to get super frustrated that you come in with all this prep and 98% of it doesn't make air. And like a couple of years into my time at ESPN, I kind of asked her, how do you deal with that? Like, what do you consider being successful? And she said the way that she viewed it was if 90% of the things that I got on air in a game came from my own eyes and ears and wasn't something that I read in a newspaper article or from a conversation, she goes, I consider that success because I'm providing something that, I'm with Bob Wischusen and Lewis Riddick that they can't provide, whether that's an injury update or an interview or just something you happen to see or overhear. That's the real purpose of the job. And you can prep as much as you want, but Bob Wischusen can tell those stories. And while there are some stories that I think are unique to a sideline reporter being able to tell because of certain conversations you've had during the week, the real bang for your buck is providing the things at home that people are interested in that make you go, huh, that's interesting. And something that the booth wouldn't otherwise have that information for.
I know you've said this, and Holly and other people that have been in those sideline reporter positions have said it's all about relationships with people. How
Mm-hmm.
do you build and maintain those across different sports?
Yeah, I mean, football's probably, in my opinion, the hardest because I'll cover 15 football games, 15 to 20 of them. And the likelihood that you have repeat teams, over the course of a year, like I might have Kansas State one year and might not see them again for 3 years. And so it's hard to build a relationship for that. Your access to the coaches also, like they're in game plan mode a lot more than other sports are when you're meeting with them. Basketball, especially because I cover a particular league for basketball, mainly the Big 12, that's way easier to build relationships. Same thing with college baseball. Like they're just not as uptight before a game. You can just go sit in a dugout and kind of chit chat with the coach. The same thing for basketball. It's not like that in football. They're a little bit more antsy. They're a little bit more guarded. But you also just, after the course of doing this I've been at ESPN now 10 years. I've been covering college football since I was 20 in college at Mizzou. What you realize is it is a very small world community. And while those coaches may leave or the SIDs or players or whatever, they're all within that same kind of community. And a lot of them will remember you, the more that you do it. And so that's why I always tell people like, you might be at local news and your goal is to get to ESPN. Well, a lot of the people when I worked in local news are either still the coaches there or coaching somewhere else. Bruce Pearl was the basketball coach. I just covered him at the national championship. And he joked with me about how I was such a baby in carrying a camera when I first started interviewing him. So building those relationships at the beginning, because they'll always be there. All the people that you work with in some form or fashion, you'll see again.
How special is college sports? I know you hit on it just a little bit, but I think there is something special about college sports, especially.
Yeah, there's a uniqueness there. And I have covered the NFL for a little bit that you don't get at those NFL stadiums. Same thing for college basketball and college baseball. And I think the perfect way to describe it is if you've never been to Neyland Stadium, we had a night game against Florida. And I have been to Neyland Stadium over 50 times and it never gets old. The running out of the tee, the fireworks, the band. And the game that I was at last year, Max Scherzer, all-star baseball pitcher, MLB, was happened to be on the sidelines. He's friends with Tony Vitello, the Tennessee baseball coach. And so I happened to be standing next to him and we have a little bit of a relationship because we both went to Missouri. And so he's standing there and he's watching the team run out of the tee and the way that the band moves and the fireworks are going off and it's a night game and it's incredible. And he just looks at me and he goes, oh my gosh, this is the most incredible thing I've ever seen. 100,000 people. And I'm like, this guy has probably seen it all. And he's sitting there singing Rocky Top because he's just in awe of what these stadiums are like.
That's awesome. Kris, before we get to my favorite part of the interview, the Fast Five round, when does your preparation for college football begin?
Oh, it's all year round. Because I also do radio, and the more that you try and follow, players, where they're going, where they've been, coaching hires, needs of teams, it becomes a lot less of like having to cram by the time the season gets there. And so, especially for college football, we cover it honestly all year round, anyways, with
Yeah.
spring football and transfer portal. Now the playoffs go so much longer into January that by the time it comes to July and now it's talking season and SEC, Big 12, all the media days. There's really only a couple months that you're technically without college football, but we still talk about it. We still cover it from an ESPN standpoint. And so for me, if I can some way be plugged into it pretty much every day, every week, then I don't feel super behind by the time week 0 comes along.
Great point. Well, Kris, this is my favorite part of any interview I do. It's the Fuse Fast Five. It's 5 quick questions.
Okay,
Are you ready?
let's go.
Favorite stadium you've ever worked in?
Neyland Stadium in
Love it.
Tennessee. Yeah.
Do you have a pre-game ritual?
Ooh, I don't. I will say I always make sure that I have the essentials on the sideline, which include an Uncrustable, grape preferred, or make your own kind of peanut butter jelly, a couple like Swedish fish packets because you need your sugar, and some form of caffeine for halftime, which for me usually is a Celsius.
That's awesome. One sideline moment you'll never forget.
The 7 overtime game that I did at Kyle Field between LSU and Texas A&M. It was after Thanksgiving weekend, and the game was just going back and forth. They changed the rules the next year because of it, and A&M ended up winning that one. I was 6 months pregnant. I had walked so much that there's a picture of me just sitting in like crisscross applesauce on the grass because I was so tired. At one point, LSU thought they won, and they dumped Ed Ogeron with Gatorade, and then the play gets called back. And at the end, A&M won. That's only the second time in history that they've stormed Kyle Field. Like being in that moment and watching play after play after play was, it was probably 6 years ago, and I feel like I was still there.
Wow. One sport you haven't worked on yet that you would love to.
That's a good one. Because up until last year, I would have said it's tennis. I would love to do the NFL draft if that counts as like a sport / event. Yes.
That's awesome. And then the last one for you, if you could host a podcast with anyone in your phone contact, who would you choose?
Oh gosh, that's such a good question. In my phone, probably Dickie V, but the problem is that I wouldn't get a single word in. But he's got the best story, like endless stories from him, and most of them aren't even basketball related.
What's the best piece of advice Dickie V has ever given you?
Just to me, it's just the optimism that he has about everything and for everything that he's been through. Like you walk in a building and he never loses that joy for being in a building. And sometimes you do this job long enough and it just becomes work. And for him, watching him it's never work. And to appreciate being able to be in those arenas day in and day out where most people at home could only dream of being able to go to. So that's probably what I've taken from being around him.
No, Kris, this was so much fun. I know you have a lot going on, so appreciate you making some time for the podcast today. And best of luck in Greenville, and then with the U.S. Open, and then once again, college football right around the corner. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Alex.